All right. So I've got a, I think, nice Zealot build. It's a stealth Zealot build for speedrunning, soloing, like carrying. Basically, I would say this is the best build if you're just playing effectively alone, or if you want to have absolutely zero reliance on your teammates, which I think makes it the best build for playing with randoms, or for like high difficulty, um, and probably generally one of the better builds in the game. Obviously, if you've got a team, like friends you play with, you can still play this build. It'll still be very good. It'll be faster than most other builds. You know, everyone can run this build in your team and it's going to be, very strong. But if what you want to do is get like top damage on your scoreboards, this isn't really the build for that. Damage is good, but it's not as good as something like a Psyker, or maybe even a Vet. The focus here is more on taking advantage of game mechanics so that you can, focus your damage onto a group of enemies and kill a whole group at once. So what we'll be doing is kiting enemies. Once we've got them where we want them, we'll burn them down with the flamer and move on. And also we'll just be kind of skipping a lot of enemies with this build. If you're playing solo, that's what I would recommend doing, is just running past things and pulling them where you want to fight them, rather than stopping every time there's an enemy and fighting that enemy. So enough of that. Looking at the gear, we've got a combat blade. It doesn't really matter which one you choose to use. You can use the old or the new one. The difference between the two is I feel the new one is easier to use. You can just spam light attacks. They'll all cleave. And so that's going to make the weapon, I think, easier to use and easier to learn a build like this with. However, I find the move set on the old combat blade makes it easier to learn how to move quickly with a combat blade. And so you might want to practice with that instead if you're having trouble with that. The downside with that weapon is the moveset is more like single target focused, and so you're not going to perform as well if you need to clear like a big group of enemies. Obviously, you can use the flamer for that though, but sometimes you're better off doing it with a combat blade. So that's the little difference. You can get good cleave out of the old version of the blade, but you need to do like combos, and so it's a bit more work to get that sort of cleave out of it. In terms of dump stats on these, we're dumping on penetration. We're going to be grabbing Uncanny Strike, which gives us 100% rending. If you're not familiar with what rending is, it's a buff that's applied to you that allows all of your damage to ignore a certain percentage of the enemy's armor rating. So you could have, like, you could hit a Poxwalker to proc Uncanny Strike. Let's say you reach 100% rending while fighting that Poxwalker. If you then hit a Crusher, you will already have the buff applied to you, and so you will ignore the entirety of that Crusher's armor rating. You don't need to like reapply the buff to yourself when you switch to another enemy, because it is a buff that's applied to you. It's not a debuff applied to the enemy. And so if that was what you wanted, you would go for brittleness, which we don't get on the combat blade. But just so you've got context, brittleness is a debuff you apply to an enemy, which means that the whole team benefits from it, but it only applies to the enemy you applied it to. Whereas rending is a buff that is applied to you, and it buffs all of your damage, but not anyone else's damage. We're going to pair that with Lacerate, because that gives us 4 bleed stacks guaranteed. Now there is Flesh Terror, which is 8 bleed stacks on crit, but this build only reaches 50% crit chance, and it actually has a base 20% crit chance. So if we were bleeding on crit, our crit chance, our bleed rate would be lower on average than with Lacerate. Plus, um, the consistency of lacerate means that you can actually know your breakpoints. You can memorize like 4 hits on a gunner's leg and it's gonna bleed out and die, and so you can move on. And these are good things to know because if you're fighting, for example, 3 gunners, 4 hits, and that's it. All 3 of them will die in a few seconds from the bleeding. And so you need to learn, obviously, what your breakpoints are if you want to play that way. But I find the consistency from this setup by far outweighs any, higher direct damage combos you can get from like more crit chance, more whatever. I find this combo is the best. In particular, this is the best because when we're dealing with crushers, you can do good damage to a crusher. You just spam light attacks, and you can easily fight off a group of 10 crushers with just light attacks. You just spam light attacks. It's going to proc Uncanny Strike sometimes because you'll land a hit in their head, and then other times it'll proc Lacerate. They'll all just bleed out slowly, and it's very strong. So that's the Combat Blade. I'll show you how to use it for movement after I explain the build. For our Flamer, we dump on mobility. Everything else we want as high as possible. Technically, I think burn caps out at like 76%, but who cares? Just, whatever. It doesn't matter. For your perks on this, sorry, I forgot to talk about the perks on the blade, I think. I would say Carapace is mandatory because Crushers are the only enemy you can't really kill with your Flamer. And so you want to be able to do good damage to them. For your second perk, you could go crit chance maybe, would be pretty decent. You could go like damage elite. You could go flak. Flak would be a really good pick because gunners are something you tend to kill with the combat blade, or at least I do. Or maniac to make the one shot on a mutant a bit more consistent as well. So those are your options there. I wouldn't really recommend going unyielding, although if you have it, then that's still fine. For your perks on the Flamer, unyielding I would say is mandatory. It does, this weapon does really good damage against bosses. If you're doing Maelstrom with like monstrous specials, you can just mow down 3 fucking like monstrosities with this thing. 3 of the weaker monstrosities. Absolutely delete the fuck out of them. All 3 because it has 100% cleave. It'll delete the horde behind them. It'll delete everything. It's absolutely amazing. But obviously the enemy with the biggest health bar is going to define how long you need to do damage for when you've got a cleave weapon, and that enemy type is going to be unyielding, right? It's going to be the boss, or it's going to be a Reaper, or it's going to be a Bulwark. So that's why I would grab that. For a second perk, I would recommend going crit chance. I've got flak here because I was doing something else, but crit chance because every crit will apply 2 burn stacks, and the burn damage stacks additively for the first like 10 stacks, maybe it's 12, I don't know. And then once you reach that threshold, it'll begin stacking multiplicatively. So the faster you reach that threshold, the faster you're going to do damage, and a little bit higher crit chance will help that because, like I said, a crit is 2 burns instead of 1. Blessings, Overpressure tier 4 if you can, and Blaze Away is a tier 3 blessing only. You still want high mobility. I said that is the dump, but you still want it as high as possible because the way you use the Flamer is you create space using your combat blade, right? You use the terrain and the like move tech to get into a position where you have time to pull your Flamer out and burst. And then as you're bursting with it, enemies are going to attack you, and so you need to be dodging around, and higher mobility will make that a bit easier. For your curios, I go stamina, toughness, toughness. In terms of perks on these, I would recommend gunner damage resist, stamina regen, ordo dockets, and that's what I would recommend for all 3. Other good options might be I don't know. There aren't really any other amazing options. You could go with some toughness, regen speed. I don't know why I have it on right now. Um, but you know, none of those are amazing. Now for our talents, we have 1 or 2 points that you can kind of put where you want, but most of these need to be this way. So these two give you a massive damage buff with your flamer, in particular against bosses, right? So 20% unyielding is like 20% boss damage basically, and then 25% range damage is going to be for your flamer, and it really does make a massive difference. So I highly recommend grabbing these. Here, Scourge, this is 30% crit chance. The way it works is you hit an enemy. If you hit an enemy that is bleeding, you will get a stack of Scourge, and each stack will give you an extra 10% crit chance. It has a maximum of 3 stacks, and every time you crit, you'll apply 1 additional bleed. And so this means when we crit, we'll apply 5 bleed because our fucking knife already applies 4 bleed. But this synergizes really well with our blades, with the blessing I picked, because every hit we do will always apply bleed if it's not a weak spot hit, which means we're very quickly going to reach 50% crit chance in combat every single time. Whereas if we had grabbed Flesh Terror instead of Lacerate here, well, getting the ball rolling would be random, right? You don't know how long it's going to take for you to proc Scourge because you don't know when you're going to crit to get a bleed out in the first place. But because we've structured the build this way, everything is consistent, and consistency, I think, is king. For our survivability here, we grab Second Wind, which is 15% toughness on dodge. This will synergize with Thy Wrath Be Swift, which says you can't be stunned. Plus, when you take damage, it increases your movement speed. And these two synergize then with Swift Certainty, which it increases your movement speed, your sprint speed, sorry. Plus, you always count as dodging while sprinting. So you see how these 3 things work together. First of all, if we're sprinting, we're dodging. If we're dodging, we're replenishing toughness. If we get hit, we don't stop sprinting, and we get a movement speed buff. So that allows us to continue sprinting, so that allows us to regenerate that toughness more easily. And so it means that you can be very mobile with pretty low risk, and it is a nice combo. Here we grab some toughness damage reduction. Blades of Faith might be a bit, I don't know, scary if your aim isn't amazing, but trust me, they're a lot easier to use than you might think. It takes a bit of practice, but just spam the shit out of these things. Try to aim for enemies' heads. Don't, compromise and go for body hits. These really only work well if you go for a headshot. But pretty quickly you'll start landing your headshots, and you'll miss the Blades of Faith when you play a different build. It'll take a few hours, but they're a lot stronger than you probably think they're going to be. On the left here we grab Until Death and Holy Revenant. These are just insanely strong abilities. Bit of damage with Duelist. This point, Stagger, you could replace it with Ambuscade. If you want to do this switch, you can use your stealth to get behind enemies, but realistically you're not going to really get a massive power buff from either of these, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Loner. Now I have tried a variation of this build where instead I went with Benediction, because I thought Loner was probably not doing a lot, but it is actually pretty nice. So it's not super noticeable in the moment, but when you don't have it, you miss it. Shroud Field plus the extra duration. This allows you to do most events solo. So, if there's like a Game Boy event, you can just go and do it without your teammates helping you. 6 seconds is long enough for you to pull that off. Then we come down here because we want swift certainty, and because realistically we only have enough points to go with the inexorable judgment anyway. So we just come down here. Now I did say there's a point we can move around, so here I'm grabbing toughness. You could go with some cooldown reduction if you want instead. But I find that I have enough cooldown reduction. Like, my cooldowns are fine. So I'm happy with my build the way it is. So that's that. Let me show you how movement works with the combat blade. Now, I would recommend going into like offline mode with a mod, finding a staircase like this and practicing on it. I'm going to show you what a normal slide looks like off this thing. So you see I get like 0 distance out of it. Now I'm going to show you what it looks like with the combat blade. Okay, so when you're doing it correctly, that's the kind of distance you should get out of it. And you know, staircases are a good spot to practice because it can confirm to you immediately whether you did it right or wrong. Now, the way it works when you're not trying to just jump off something is you hold your heavy, and you see here right now I'm holding. I didn't let go, but the animation cancels itself automatically. So you need to memorize and get a feel for what the duration of the animation is, and then once you have that, you need to learn to let go right before it's going to happen and slide into it. What that does is the letting go kind of pulls your character forward in the game, and it gives you more speed in the slide. So if I'm running around and I do it like this, you see that slowed me down there, and it slowed me down there, and every time it does it, it slows me down. But if I slide into it, I don't slow down and I speed up instead. So that's why you want to slide. The slide is also an opportunity for you to be dodging stuff. We're dodging stuff anyway, but stuff can go over your head. If there's a trapper behind you, for example, that's going to net you, you can just slide, the net will go over your head. So you can learn, that's kind of the next level, I guess, is as you're running, you learn to time these things with those events from enemies. Now, to clarify something as well, as you're running around, I said you need to memorize how long each animation is. It's okay if you do it too fast, okay? What you don't want to do is to do it too slow, because if you do it too slow, I showed you, right, you're going to slow down if that happens. What you can do at first is this. Just go really fast with it. Don't try to memorize it at first, just get a feel for the slides and pull of the animation, and then allow it to take a bit longer and get more comfortable with it. That's how I would recommend practicing it. So with all that being said, what I'll do now is a quick run, just so you can kind of see it in game. But I think that's it for the actual build. I wouldn't recommend changing anything other than this one point. I really think pretty much everything else is where it should be. Yeah, I don't think I would change too much. If you have any questions though, feel free to leave a comment. I'll try to reply to stuff as much as possible. I'll do a different map than this, so I'll see you in a second.
Claim to scour these stones clean of heresy and corruption. That battle is judgment in the dark. Shadows, retribution.
Scudders. Ammo crate.
Onward to the Emperor for a Tola!
Does thou wish death? Stay where your battle!
Readying bombardment!
Not a gunner! Use your voice! Sniper, kill it! Heretic bomber! Kill that shotgunner! Harass that runner! Mutant dead!
Alas, though we have no time to enter the archive. Perhaps another time.
I'll make it right!
Gun battle is going to blow! Med station! The God Emperor blesses us! That pulpit be long empty, I reckon.
Behold the bridge of many martyrs. It is still glorious.
I'm in no mood for a hunt.
shadow.